It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Monday the 27th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So truce to be extended. We hope so. The 4-day pause in fighting between Hamas and Israel enters its final day, but there are calls for an extension to release more hostages.
And Boris blasts anti-Semitism. Tens of thousands of people marched through London at a demonstration against anti-Semitism this weekend. It was the biggest of its kind in 90 years. Boris Johnson explains why he was there.
What we've seen is, I'm afraid, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism and a failure to focus on the appalling terroristic acts of Hamas.
And COVID critics spies, ministers are accused of a cover-up over soldiers secretly spying on critics of the government's response to COVID. This comes as the COVID inquiry resumes this morning. Our reporter Lisa Hartle is there.
It's the day of the mayors today, so we're going to hear from London's Sadiq Khan, Manchester's Andy Burnham and Liverpool's Steve Rotherham. All of those are going to be appearing as witnesses at the COVID inquiry today.
And Richard Tice and Lee Anderson, the spat, the Reform UK leader, has denied the Tory deputy chairman was offered money to defect to his party. Our political correspondent Olivia Utley, she's got the latest.
Yes, the row between Lee Anderson and Richard Tice wages on. And with the deputy party chairman of the Tory party digging his heels in, it looks like the police could now be involved.
Oh, and tributes to Terry Venables. After the death of the English football icon, people from around the world continue to pay their respects. We want to hear your memories of him throughout the show. And we're going to show you the best Christmas ads.
Yeah, it's really simple. The simplicity of the message is why it's so effective, and it cost a few £100 to produce, and it's going to make you go, ah.
Yeah, it's been watched over 1 million times online. Don't miss it. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, here's Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom.
Bev Turner, thank you very much. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says he's committed to reducing net migration, admitting the numbers are still too high. His comments come as James Cleverly prepares to face questions in the Commons for the first time as Home Secretary. He's expected to address the latest figures, as well as the government's efforts to stop the boats after the Supreme Court ruled against the Rwanda scheme. Rishi Sunak says measures are being taken to tackle both issues.
Encouraging that the Office for National Statistics last week did say that the numbers are already slowing, but we need to do more. I've already taken action to tighten the number of dependents that students can bring when they come and study here. We'd seen a very sharp rise in those numbers, and that measure that I took represents the single biggest measure to bring down legal migration that anyone's ever taken. But of course, as we need to do more, we'll look at that, and where there are abuses of the system, we will of course act on that, because the levels do need to come down. They are too high.
Concerns have been raised over the list of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners due to be released today. Mediators say they're working with both sides to resolve issues on the final day of the agreed truce. Hamas has released dozens of women and children over the past 3 days. It's hoped the pause in fighting will be extended to allow for further exchanges. Meanwhile, the International Committee of the Red Cross is warning the humanitarian situation in Gaza is still desperate, with spokesperson Matthew Morris saying the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse.
The intensity of the fighting in Gaza has meant that humanitarians have obviously struggled to do what is needed. And we know, I'm sure your viewers who've been following this in recent weeks have known how difficult it is to get aid supplies in, but also to get people out.
Israel has told the US the campaign in Gaza will resume with full force once the temporary truce comes to an end. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, who's faced criticism after anti-Semitic content appeared on his social media site, has landed in Tel Aviv. He's due to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later. The tech entrepreneur says he's against anything that promotes hate and conflict. And drivers are being warned to avoid puddles after a record number of pothole breakdowns. The AA says it received more than 52,000 call-outs last month for vehicles caught out by damaged roads. That's the most for any October on record. Earlier this month, the Prime Minister pledged to tackle the scourge of potholes, but the cost of tackling the issue is estimated at £14 billion. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It's 9:35 on Monday morning.
And good news, a further 17 captives were released by Hamas last night. Thousands cheered as a convoy carrying the third group of hostages arrived in Israel.
That's right. Meanwhile, Israel's prison service confirmed the release of 39 Palestinian prisoners in the exchange.
Over the weekend, the 9-year-old Irish-Israeli girl Emily Hand had an emotional reunion with her family. Watch the moment she was reunited with her dad.
So, of course, that's the father and daughter, if you remember. He had said he hoped that she'd had a very swift end of her life when they thought that she'd been killed in the 7th of October atrocity, and then he learned that she was alive. So it's an amazing story.
She looked OK on the surface, but heaven knows what's gone on behind the scenes, because we just don't know. We know they were fed rice and slept on plastic chairs, but that's about all we know so far.
So as we enter the final 24 hours of the pause in the conflict, there are calls for it to be extended. So we're all hoping it will be extended. I don't think it's highly likely that it will be. Do you? Well,
it's only a point if Hamas agree to release more hostages. And there was talk that they would release another 11. Israel would respond by releasing some people from their jails too. But they're not going to agree to a ceasefire, Israel.
I don't think so. Well, tens of thousands of people attended a march against anti-Semitism in London on Sunday over fears of the rising number of anti-Semitic incidents here. And
among the number was the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and he spoke exclusively to GB News.
What we're all doing here, and the only thing we're really doing, is showing solidarity with Jewish people. And that's necessary because since October the 7th, I'm afraid there's been a very peculiar response in many parts of the world, including, I'm sad to say, in London. And what we've seen is, I'm afraid, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism and a failure to focus on the appalling terroristic acts of Hamas.
So joining us in the studio, we have our reporter Charlie Peters and Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine. Good morning to you both. Charlie, are we hearing any news at all from the Middle East about whether this ceasefire will be extended?
Well, in the final 24 hours of this truce, it doesn't appear to be the case. And all the indicators and warnings from the Israeli side is that they are looking to kick on with their military operation, saying last night that they will use the full force of their military to continue south. But most analysts say this morning that actually they won't be able to use their full force because they've moved some 2 million civilians into the south, an area, a humanitarian corridor of just 14 kilometres squared, 40% higher density than Greater London, a very intense situation. When they went to the north, their immediate objective, they used 3 or 4 armoured division, tanks, all blazing, artillery, the works. They can't do that in the south. There are 2 million civilians there. So we're going to see more deft and gentle operations. I think that's the likely next phase. So the Special Forces units of the Israeli Defence Forces, Sayaret Metkal, it's modelled after the SAS. They even share a motto of who dares wins. They will be moving next, almost certainly, to conduct those operations. And they will have to be nimble and gentle because they've just lost 70 troops in this advance. Some 4,000 Hamas fighters have also been killed. But civilian casualties are, of course, a growing concern for the international community. And if they continue with that kind of operation, it will become devastating.
Sarah Vine, great. I thought it was fantastic to see so many people marching on the streets peacefully. Spontaneous singing of the national anthem at the Cenotaph.
And also just a very nice atmosphere, very kind of peaceful and very different from the sort of thing that we've seen in recent weeks. I think there was a deliberate, choice to have a peaceful march, to have something that was very civilised. I know lots of people who went on it, and they said it was very uplifting, quite sombre, but very uplifting, and there were no problems. Tommy Robertson tried to get a coffee in Pret at one point and was swiftly removed by the police. So he did have a go, but there was no purchase.
No, and good to see people like Boris Johnson there.
Yeah, very good to see Boris, and he was there with Carrie and their son, one of their children. And the historian Simon Sebag Montefiore was there. He was stopped by a lot of people. There were some there were also a lot of people who are not Jewish.
Yes.
I mean, Boris.
It's wondered why it took quite so long for it to happen, because we had every week we seem to be having the pro-Palestinian marches.
I think it very much happened in response to the fact that a lot of people in the Jewish community felt that, this kind of anti-Semitism that we've seen at these, other marches has been so prevalent, and I think that it just took a while to get for everyone to get their act together. But it really was a response to that. It was a way of saying, look, you can protest, you can state your case, but you don't have to be, you don't have to insult, you don't have to be anti-Palestine or anti-Islam. You can just be yourself.
What do we read into that, Sarah? The fact that the Israeli protest was so peaceful and it wasn't as angry. I think pro-Palestinian protests have had a lot of anger.
Well, I mean, it should be pointed out that the leader of Hizb ut-Tahrir was one of the organisers of many of those protests. Hizb ut-Tahrir is a terrorist organisation that has a stated aim of establishing a global caliphate under Sharia law. This man that the Mail on Sunday exposed, who is in charge of it in the UK, he's a GP from Heathrow, and so you have a very different type of person organising that march. There are elements in those marches that are definitely not, how should we say,
pro-Britain, I would
kumbaya.
say.
They're not.
They hate the state of Israel.
They don't. They don't want to join hands across the world. They want to. They want to get. They have an agenda. And he's not the only person. So you've got a lot of elements in those marches. A lot of the people are there for all the right reasons, because they're protesting against the loss of lives in Gaza, and that's completely okay. But you also have a lot of elements in those marches who are not, I don't think, there for the right reasons.
I think that's right, Charlie, isn't it, what Sarah's saying about compared what happened in some of them pro-Palestinian marches, some of the people who were there.
I think comparing also the police response is very interesting. I think there have been, of course, many accusations about two-tiered policing. As Sarah mentioned how Tommy Robinson was dealt with, and they released a statement that met yesterday saying that some of the organisers didn't want him there, so we arrested him. Well, or the Palestinian protesters, did they want some of the nefarious elements at their protest? Why weren't they removed at the same time? There does seem to have been a different approach in how the Met dealt with Tommy Robinson as how they dealt with people, say, wearing balaclavas and chanting for Hamas. This is, I think, quite a controversial split.
Hizb ut-Tahrir had a flag, on Saturday. They had a flag saying, calling for a holy war. And, no one at that march went up to policemen and said, I'm sorry, this is not OK. We don't want these people here. Can you get rid of them?
It shouldn't take the police being told to do that kind of stuff to do it anyway. They should act, you should say, perhaps, when they see someone carrying a flag calling for jihad.
OK, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Sarah, for now. Ministers have been accused of covering up a situation in which soldiers secretly spied on British critics of the government's response to COVID.
We're going to get the info on that later with the former Brexit Secretary David Davis, but now the COVID inquiry continues this morning, and our reporter Lisa Hartle is there, who can tell us who's going to be giving evidence.
Hello. Yes, well, today it's the day of the mayors. So we just saw Sadiq Khan, London's mayor, arriving along with Greater Manchester's Andy Burnham. They're appearing this morning, and this afternoon we're expecting Steve Rotherham, the mayor of Liverpool. So it's expected today, this will be module 2, this hearing, so looking at the core political decision-making when we saw all the restrictions being brought into play during the pandemic. Now, the mayors are likely to be questioned about their communication with government at the time. So when government were putting forward requests wanting to have certain restrictions brought in certain areas, what happened with the communication between government and mayors during that time. Now, Andy Burnham in particular, in October 2020, was involved in a sort of standoff between Boris Johnson and himself, because at the time we saw a big increase in the number of cases that were happening in Manchester. So Boris Johnson at the time wanted to bring in the full extent of restrictions, whereas Andy Burnham was pushing back at the time, just saying, well, what about the financial support for people? Also, why is this just Manchester? You're making Manchester a sacrificial lamb. This should be a whole nationwide approach to tackling the virus. And as it happens days later, that is exactly what happened. So there'll be questions over that. And also, Sir Jonathan Van Tam has previously said, he's of course the former Deputy Chief Medical Officer, he's previously said that this arguing between different mayors with government actually hindered or hampered the restrictions that were being requested by government to try and bring those levels down in certain areas with local lockdowns and things like that. So that's the kind of thing that they're going to be expected to go into today, and Sadiq Khan is expected to be the first witness to speak face the inquiry, and that will be at 10:30 this morning.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Lisa Hartle there at the COVID inquiry.
Sarah Vine, in your column very recent in Demo, you were excoriating about the COVID inquiry.
It wasn't very much, but I mean, I just think it's. I don't know what it's doing. It's not answering any of the questions that we want answering. It's just a sort of endless psychodrama of he said, she said, I was right, I was better than the other person, that person is bad. I mean, it's boring. It's like watching EastEnders.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what it's doing, though. I think it's moving towards the conclusion that in the event of another global emergency, whatever that might be, we give all of our powers to the World Health Organization and the pandemic treaty, which some countries luckily are now pulling out of, and we look like we're going to be dangerously moving into it. And then the WHO make decisions on our behalf.
Yeah, no, that would be madness. I mean, I really do think that there are some questions to be answered, such as why was it that we bought all the private hospitals and then never used any of them, and spent an absolute fortune. Yeah. There are really important sort of technical governmental questions about sort of administration that need answers. All I'm getting is sort of just kind of lefty government bashing, which is quite...
Yeah, and there's no indication so far, we might get more about that when Rishi Sunak's in there, Sarah, as the Chancellor, as to what cost-effective analysis they did about doing a lockdown, because we're pretty sure they didn't do one. What impact it would have on the economy. We know that one or two of them were very worried about the impact... Whitty was worried about the impact on kids and mental health, but not worried enough to slow down the lockdown. In fact, he thought the lockdown was too slow.
But didn't one of the people who was advising the government scientifically have quite a lot of interest in...
Patrick Vallance.
Yes.
He had £650,000 worth of shares in GlaxoSmithKline.
And then he was put in the head of the vaccine task force.
Yeah, and
no one asked him about it.
Well, it was raised, Sarah, but he wasn't challenged as to whether it was appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we've got a lot of... There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I think, for a lot of people, lockdown was... a lot of people made a lot of money out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, the Sunday papers filled every week, aren't they? And then we had Matt Hancock, who was the Health Secretary, his mate who ran the local pub.
Yeah.
got a contract for PPE.
He won't be asked about that. Matt Hancock is actually giving evidence to the COVID inquiry Thursday and Friday at the end of this week. I might go and camp out.
But I just think at the moment, it's costing a fortune. It's going to drag on and on and on. And
2026, 2027?
£500 million of taxpayers' money.
It could straddle, a Conservative government and a Labour government, at which point it'll completely lose all direction because it'll become it's too political already. I think it will become even more political, which is sort of pointless. And I think what it really is, it should really be almost be a sort of civil service inquiry as to how we got things wrong and how we could get them right if this happened again. That's what people really need. I think that's what the public want. They want to know, have we got a plan?
I know, and I mean, every time I look up and see that lawyer, that case whose name I can't remember, he's grandstanding.
Yes, he's grandstanding, but and the conclusion will be we should have locked down more, and not should we even have locked down at all. It's criminal, and I think they should pull the plug on it, actually. And maybe, who knows, if Keir Starmer is voted in the next election...
Well, he will be.
Maybe he will have the...
well, they were as bad.
Spine.
Labour wanted to be locked down even quicker.
Yeah.
Well, Labour obviously tried to capitalise politically on the situation, which it's not great. But you sort of. So I think, but I just don't know. We'll get to the end of it in 2 or 3 years' time, and what will we have concluded?
We'll have forgotten everything.
Most people will have forgotten it.
They will.
People who had terrible things happen to them, like getting arrested for going for a walk, or not being able to say goodbye to their parents or whatever, won't have any answers.
No.
Their lives won't have been compensated.
No, they'll get no comfort or closure.
It is sort of I hate to say this on air, but it's a bit of an onanistic exercise.
Yeah.
I just don't know that it's taking...
And there's no trust. And every time that it goes on, the trust from the public to those in authority is undermined even more. Sarah, thank you. Right, Conservative MP and GB News presenter Lee Anderson has accused Richard Tice of making wild accusations after he claimed that Lee had threatened to quit the Tories in order to negotiate himself a promotion.
Well, let's try and make head or tail of this, because who says what? You never quite know who's telling it as it is. Joining us from Westminster, our very own political correspondent, Olivia Utley. This is a sorry little mess, isn't it? He says and he says. Who's telling the truth here, Olivia?
Well, it's a very strange story, and both sides seem to be digging their heels in. Just to recap on what happened over the weekend, the Sunday Times reported that Lee Anderson had been secretly filmed speaking to a Conservative association in Cambridge, claiming that a party beginning with R, he didn't actually say Reform, but a party beginning with R had offered him a lot of money. He said, a lot of money, I mean a lot, to defect and join them. Now, Lee Anderson, Richard Tice, the leader of Reform, went on Laura Kuenssberg's show on the BBC yesterday and said that is absolutely not true. Lee Anderson was not offered any money. What he was offered was the opportunity to reshape the discourse. Well, Lee Anderson has come back and said, no, I was offered money by Reform. He claims that he was offered the equivalent of 5 years of his salary, so that's 430 grand, if he stood for Reform and failed to get elected at the next election. So as you say, it's basically a war of words between the two of them. He said. What's now emerged is that Simon Hart, the Tory chief whip, was informed by Lee Anderson in February. Well, he alleged to the Tory chief whip that he had been offered this money. Simon Hart told Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, and the Speaker said that the Conservatives should pass this over to the police because there's a danger that Richard Tice, if this is true, was breaking electoral law. So now it seems as though the issue is in the police's hands, and perhaps soon we'll get to the bottom of it.
OK, thank you very much, Olivia Utley there. What do you make of it? We need Richard Tice and we need Lee Anderson to come on and fight this out, don't we?
We did ask both of them. We would rather like them both in the studio together. We'd had to put them at quite a long way apart, I think.
It's the idea that Richard Tice would have to offer someone money to come and join his party is basically what Lee is getting at.
Yes.
He's trying to insult Richard by saying, not even, I won't.
And of course, Richard Tice is a fabulously wealthy man.
Exactly. So, £430,000 is probably his gardening bill or something. It's not going to sort of...
And of course, Richard keeps telling us he's talking to Tory MPs about defecting, but none have so far. And if we remember going back all the way to UKIP, 2 defected. One was called Mark Reckless, and the other one was Kenterby, and they both lost their seat.
Yeah. No, exactly.
So the history isn't kind to defectors.
The thing is, he might not have to have any defectors to do all right at the next election. We hear repeatedly from viewers that they are tempted to give their votes to Reform.
They'll pinch Tory votes.
And also we've got Nigel's... I mean, now that we've all seen Nigel's bottom, obviously everyone's going to vote Reform.
And he's just lost an opponent in the jungle.
He has, yes.
Breaking news.
Well, we don't want to tell you who it is, though. You're going to have to stay with us for just a moment.
There's been some movement in the jungle. On the grounds of ill health.
The thing is, Rishi Sunak was talking over the weekend, wasn't he, saying a vote for Nigel's lot, as he called them. I don't think he said the name of the party. A vote for Nigel's lot will be a vote for Labour, he said.
Well, it will split the... I mean, it would split the Tory vote. I mean, you know, that's the thing. It will cream off a load of natural Conservatives who won't vote.
But Sarah, I think some Labour Brexiteers, and there were quite a few up in the Red Wall, they might vote Reform because they'll be so fed up with the Tories.
But the Conservatives have got a problem because they will lose a lot of votes to Reform and they'll lose a lot to the Lib Dems.
We need to wrap up. We are getting confirmation. Thank you so much, Sarah. We're getting confirmation about this person who has left the jungle. Don't go anywhere. We've got the weather next. Come back to us in just a couple of minutes.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. It's a bit of a cloudy, wet morning, but it will become brighter as we move through into the afternoon, particularly across the north and the west. And we can see outbreaks of rain across England and Wales, showers across eastern Scotland, some of these wintry leading to an icy start. But slowly through the day, this low pressure system slips to the southeast. It allows skies to brighten, so sunny spells, Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and then eventually western fringes of England and Wales. Central and eastern England staying quite grey. Cool, temperatures 6 or 7 degrees. Mild initially across the southwest with highs of 11 or 12, but then temperatures dropping away quite quickly as cold air filters southwards on a northerly breeze. Frequent showers still piling in to eastern areas as we head through into the early hours. The west turning calmer with some clear spells and a frost forming. Some fog patches perhaps across southern parts of Scotland. Icy stretches still in the north and temperatures a little lower, generally falling to low single figures in the countryside, below freezing. So a frosty start, an icy start across the north and the west, quite a bit of cloud in the south with some fog patches, but it slowly becomes brighter and most of Tuesday will be dry with sunny spells. There will be a scattering of showers largely across northern and western parts of Scotland, a few down the east coast, and also 1 or 2 later across central southern England. But plenty of sunshine and a cool feeling day for all. See you soon.
Rishi Sunak is going to be speaking next. He's at a big conference at Hampton Court Palace. He said he was excited. I wasn't sure whether he was on the ice rink at Hampton Court Palace. Very nice at this time of the year.
He's going to be talking about big new investments.
£30 billion.
A lot of money.
Is it going to bring any jobs to your area? We'll be considering that. And also, who has just left the jungle? That's
earlier than expected.
This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
10 o'clock on Monday the 27th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Boris blasts anti-Semitism. Tens of thousands of people marched through London at a demonstration against anti-Semitism this weekend. It was the biggest of its kind for 90 years. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson told us why he was there.
What we've seen is, I'm afraid, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism and a failure to focus on the appalling terroristic acts of Hamas.
Of investment into Great Britain. In the next few minutes, the Prime Minister will address investors and business leaders at Hampton Court Palace. It's all to do with investment and in science and technology. We're going to bring you that.
And tribute to Terry Venables after the death of the English football coach. People from all around the world continue to pay their respects. We want to hear your memories of him throughout the show.
And we're going to tell you who's left the jungle, and we're going to show you the best Christmas ad that you won't see on your TV, but it has been watched more than 1 million times online, and it only costs 700 quid. Email is gbviews@gbnews.com. First, though, here's Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom.
Bev Turner, thank you very much. 1 minute past 10, this is the latest. The Prime Minister says he's committed to reducing net migration, admitting the numbers are still too high. His comments come as James Cleverly prepares to face questions in the Commons for the first time as Home Secretary. He's expected to address the latest figures as well as the government's efforts to stop the boats after the Supreme Court ruled against the Rwanda scheme. Rishi Sunak says measures are being taken to tackle both issues.
Encouraging that the Office for National Statistics last week did say that the numbers are already slowing, but we need to do more. I've already taken action to tighten the number of dependents that students can bring when they come and study here. We'd seen a very sharp rise in those numbers, and that measure that I took represents the single biggest measure to bring down legal migration that anyone's ever taken. But of course, as we need to do more, we'll look at that, and where there are abuses of the system, we will of course act on that, because the levels do need to come down. They are too high.
Nearly £30 billion is being invested into new projects in the UK. The Prime Minister says there's positive momentum in the economy, particularly for science, tech and creative industries. He's addressing the Global Investment Summit, which also takes a step towards levelling up, with more than 12,000 jobs being created from just some of today's announcements. Business and Trade Minister Lord Dominic Johnson says the summit marks a turning point for Britain.
We don't commercialise the extraordinary
brains and talents of the people in this country, we'll end up being a second-class price-taking nation. So this is a national endeavour, one, and two, it's working. A lot of people talk down our investment flows, but we are top in the world for greenfield renewable, and we're only third in terms of greenfield investments behind China and the USA. So really we're presenting a phenomenal story here. And the great message from today, which is something that we want to celebrate, is being bullish on Britain.
Concerns have been raised over the list of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners due to be released today. Mediators say they're working with both sides to resolve issues on the final day of the agreed truce. Hamas has released dozens of women and children over the past 3 days. It's hoped the pause in fighting will be extended to allow for further exchanges. Meanwhile, the International Committee of the Red Cross is warning the humanitarian situation in Gaza is still desperate, with spokesperson Matthew Morris saying the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse.
The intensity of the fighting in Gaza has meant that humanitarians have obviously struggled to do what is needed. And we know, I'm sure your viewers who've been following this in recent weeks have known how difficult it is to get aid supplies in, but also to get people out.
Israel has told the US its campaign in Gaza will resume with full force once the temporary truce comes to an end. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, who's faced criticism after anti-Semitic content appeared on his social media site, has landed in Tel Aviv. He's due to meet the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later. The tech entrepreneur says he's against anything that promotes hate and conflict. The trial of 2 teenagers accused of murdering transgender teen Brianna Gay starts today. The 16-year-old was found with fatal stab wounds in a park in Cheshire in February. A boy and a girl, both 15 at the time, were arrested and charged with the murder. The defendants, now aged 16, cannot be named because of their age. Both deny the murder. Their trial's expected to last 3 to 4 weeks. And drivers are being warned to avoid puddles after a record number of pothole breakdowns. The AA says it received more than 52,000 call-outs last month for vehicles caught out by damaged roads. That's the most for any October on record. Earlier this month, Prime Minister pledged to deal with the scourge of potholes, but the cost of tackling the issue is estimated at £14 billion. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It's 10:05 Monday morning. Hope you had a good weekend. You've been getting in touch at home. John has said he noticed that Boris was on the Antisemitism march yesterday. Good to see the former mayor supporting the Jewish community.
Absolutely, and lots of you talking about COVID inquiry. You heard what Sarah Vine had to say about it earlier. Ross says it's already gone on far too long. Waste of money and resources. Ross, let me tell you, it's going to go on for another 3 years.
That's right. And Simon says the COVID inquiry is supposed to find out what went wrong and to learn lessons. More and more, it's evident that it is a witch hunt with very little to do with events during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, moving on, tens of thousands of people were at that march against anti-Semitism in London at the weekend. 105,000, I think, was the official estimate, protesting over the rising number of anti-Semitic incidents.
That's right. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was among those attending, and he spoke exclusively to GB News.
What we're all doing here, and the only thing we're really doing, is showing solidarity with Jewish people. And that's necessary because since October the 7th, I'm afraid there's been a very peculiar response in many parts of the world, including, I'm sad to say, in London. And what we've seen is, I'm afraid, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism and a failure to focus on the appalling terroristic acts of Hamas.
Well, we're going to be going to live to Rishi Sunak soon also at this investment summit in Hampton. But first of all, political commentator Piers Pottinger, the founder of Europe's biggest PR firm, Bell Pottinger, is with us here. Just your reflections on the anti-Semitism march yesterday, Piers. Very peaceful, very different atmosphere to the pro-Palestinian march.
Definitely, very dignified. It was good to see. It was calm. It was... there was some good to see certain people there. It was obvious also the absence of others, particularly anyone on the front bench of the Labour Party.
Yes.
And also those wonderful trade union leaders like the delightful Mick Lynch, who was happy to march with the Palestinians march, but not to stand up for anti-Semitism, which is a
it's
really...
quite significant, isn't it, that there was no... I think Peter Kyle was there, who's a shadow minister on the Labour benches, but no, as you say, no sign of Keir Starmer or Angela Rayner.
No.
The big beasts.
None of them were there, and and even old Labour hands weren't there. It was disgraceful. And it does show that anti-Semitism within the Labour Party is still a massive problem. And I think Keir Starmer will find one of his problems coming up at the next election will be the lack of Jewish people voting for him.
Yeah, and of course 200,000 is the Jewish community, 5 million is the Muslim community. The Muslims, we know, largely vote Labour. The political odds are stacked against, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. But, I mean, the good thing about that march was at least it showed that there were some sensible people. As Boris quite rightly pointed out, everyone seems to be taken in by the Hamas propaganda and the whole business of the hostages. No one mentions that in order to release the hostages, Israel has to release hundreds more Palestinian prisoners in their jails, and those prisoners are mostly in jail for a reason.
Yeah.
They're criminals.
Yeah.
We're looking at live pictures here from the Global Investment Summit. Piers Pottinger, this is at Hampton now. This is a good news day, isn't it?
Terrific. This is really good news for Britain. I think this really is a great achievement by everyone involved. I think Kemi Badenoch deserves some praise here. The most significant factor is that the investment's coming from all over the world. Australia, America, even Taiwan, as well as Europe, Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands,
Spain. Wasn't all that supposed to stop after Brexit, Piers?
Yeah, exactly. This is good news for Britain, and it's a real achievement by Rishi and the Conservative government.
30 billion is the figure they're talking. I've seen a draft of the Prime Minister's speech. He's saying it's at least 12,000 jobs being created from some of today's investments.
Yeah, this will help in the levelling up desire, and it is of huge significance. There's no question about it. We're talking about nearly £30 billion of inward investment. That's new investment in the United Kingdom from all over the world. Now, if that isn't a vote of confidence in the stability and the opportunity in this country, nothing is.
You'd have advised many of those companies at Bell Pottinger, Piers, and of course one of the big companies that kicked up before the Brexit vote was Nissan, because they said it would be the death for the car industry. They've announced at the weekend a further £2 billion investment in Sunderland, 2 new cars they're going to produce, and a big giga batteries, massive for the northeast.
Absolutely, and all credit to Nissan, because they've admitted they were wrong about Brexit.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is of great significance. Of course, the Remainers and a lot of the left-wing press will not give this the prominence that it deserves. But I think this is a major achievement, and also coming on the back of the autumn statement, where there were biggest business tax cuts for many decades. This is really a sign that the Cabinet have got things moving in a positive way.
You've been advising Tory Prime Ministers and Ministers since Thatcher.
Yeah.
Do you think it's too late now for this Tory government?
No, I don't, because I was reminded by a friend of mine at the weekend, in 1992, everyone wrote off John Major. It was in the middle of a recession. And people weren't feeling better off or feeling any optimism, really, and yet Major won. And the reason he won is that people felt Kinnock was not up to it. And again, quite often you'll find that British people vote against rather than for something. And in 1992, they voted against Labour because they were scared of what Labour would do to the economy, quite rightly. And at the moment, Starmer has no visible, credible, well-funded policies about business such as this. You'd never see a Labour government delivering anything like this has just happened today.
I was gobsmacked with his interview he gave on Classic FM last week, and he was asked to pick a piece of music that best summed up for him the Labour Party, and he picked "Oh to Flipping Joy," which is the EU national anthem. Does he not think of any? Does he not think anything through?
No, I don't think he
staggering.
did. No, and of course it was used by the Germans in the war. Rather a great deal.
It was.
And I think, unless I'm very much mistaken, the same people who also slaughtered millions of Jewish people in Auschwitz.
Yeah, I mean, I just read it twice, thought, he can't have said that. He must have got the symphony wrong. No, it was the Ode to Joy, which has been the EU's national anthem for the best part of half a century.
But maybe he knows that perhaps it's the Remainer crowd that he wants to appeal
well,
to.
perhaps that's his calculation, or do you think he thought it through, Piers?
I'm frightened if he has, because but it was inept. Because first of all, he should have chosen something at least British.
Yes,
and maybe something
Land
with
of
a bit
Hope and
more
Glory.
Proper British appeal.
We just think Kemi Badenoch is now taken to the stage at this summit. This is at Hampton Court. They're really throwing everything at this, Piers Pottinger, because later on we know that the King will be hosting a reception at Buckingham Palace with some of these world leaders, some of these businessmen and women. And
quite right.
Yeah, and Kemi Badenoch, of course, is our business trade secretary, and so this won't be doing her leadership prospects any harm.
No, not at all. I mean, she is also very much a popular person with the membership of the party and growing in popularity, and I think this will do her immense good. She has been travelling around the world tying these deals up, and the fruit has come to bear today. It really is, and I can't stress enough the fact that it's from all these countries around the world. It's a huge list. And even Taiwan, which is in Taipei, kind of the home of software development, they're investing in technology in the UK. It's fantastic.
Let's have a little listen. So here is the Business and Trade Secretary, Kemi Badenoch.
More greenfield FDI than Germany and France combined. We also have the most valuable tech sector, only the third in the world to reach £1 trillion in value. Last year alone, we created 112,000 jobs in all corners of the UK from inward investment, with many more being created here today. Since the Department for Business and Trade was formed just a few months ago, we have seen even greater investment in this country. In my first few days as Business Secretary, I ushered in a momentous deal for Airbus and Rolls-Royce, providing new aircraft for Air India. In September, BMW announced the transformation of their Oxford Mini plant, which secured 4,000 jobs with Stellantis.
So that's Kemi Badenoch speaking. She is the business secretary. We're expecting the Prime Minister in the next few minutes. He's obviously going to try and own as much of this because, look, Piers, of course this is important for the economy, but also this is desperately important for the Tories' election prospects, which are looking pretty bleak.
Absolutely. I mean, he needs this. And but it is tremendous, and as I say, I fear it won't get the coverage it deserves. But it is. I mean, to say it's a step in the right direction is an understatement. This is something that he should be able to build on, and I would expect to see more investment coming as a result of this.
Do you know why I think it doesn't get the attention it might deserve, Piers? It's because when we're talking about these jobs in the tech industry, in the digital landscape changing, we're at the forefront, people aren't seeing it. So it does feel like these sorts of industries are kind of hidden away. People are seeing high streets with boarded up businesses and nowhere to park their car when they go to do the shopping. How do the government get across this?
Well, they'll definitely see it in Sunderland because we're looking at 12,000 jobs up there.
Yeah.
And that isn't just in the technology. It's all the suppliers that supply the factories, all the local businesses that benefit from cafes to bus services, all kinds of... It sort of filters down throughout every aspect of the life. And also the people living around there will find themselves suddenly in work and with some money to spend. It will have an effect. It will take a bit of time, admittedly, but this is very positive indeed. And really, it's also extremely hard for the Labour Party or anyone else in opposition to knock this.
Why don't they come out and actually say it's a good thing? For once, knock all the Yahoo stuff on the head. Because, I mean, I've already heard somebody sort of saying, oh, well, this is all very well, but they've been in power for 13 years. Hang on, if it's good news, it's good news, isn't it?
It is good news. This has happened now. We're talking about today. There's no point turning the clock back.
No.
Let's look at what's happening now. Rishi hasn't been in power very long, and he's delivering. And this is actually of great significance, coupled with the autumn statement. Yeah. It's moving in the right direction. Don't forget there'll be another budget in the spring, and I think there'll be more benefits coming through from that. There won't be an election in the spring. I'm absolutely convinced of that. There'll be an election at the last possible moment, and by then one would hope that some of this will have
because he needs something. Because even if you look in the Conservative Home League table, Conservative Home is the Bible of Tory party members and activists. They do a monthly league table of which minister is most popular. Rishi's down in about number 20.
Yeah, because unfortunately, he doesn't have a natural charisma.
No.
He doesn't have a natural affinity in communicating with the people. Strangely enough, the best person in the cabinet for this is probably David Cameron, who, like him or not, he does have a way at communicating
he's got an aura.
And reaching the people in a really positive way, I think.
Do you think, Piers, it might go until January 24 for the election?
I think if they can leave it till then, they will. But it also depends a bit on Starmer, because I don't think that the Labour Party is so scared of committing to policies that are going to cost them votes. They're terrified of that, so they're saying nothing. And again, if you look at the Labour Party front bench, Really? Would you want them governing this country? Would you want them running the economy?
I know.
Oh, look, here's the Prime Minister.
Here's the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. He's walking to the platform. We can see him standing above the platform. So we'll have a listen to him for a few minutes.
The UK's second Global Investment Summit. Now, my argument today is that the UK is a modern, dynamic, thriving economy. And where better to prove those futuristic credentials than a 500-year-old palace? But this summit is not just a sales pitch for Britain, although you'd better believe that I'm going to give you that. It's also a chance for us to say thank you. I've spent my career before politics in business and finance, and so have many of my top team, including the Chancellor. And we know that it's not governments that grow the economy. It's businesses and investors like all of you. You create jobs, drive growth, generate wealth, and you even take on some of the biggest social challenges we face. And it may be unfashionable to say, but I believe that your success is our country's success. So I'm really grateful to all of you for making the time to be here today. And your presence, your decision to choose to invest in Britain, is a huge vote of confidence in our country's future. And I think you're absolutely right to feel that confidence, because we are setting about making this the best place in the world to invest and do business. Now, I'm unashamedly proud of Britain, and there is a growing momentum right here in the UK right now. Don't just take my word for it. PwC's survey this year of thousands of global CEOs rated the UK the most attractive investment destination in Europe. And you can see that confidence in the decisions that people are making, like Tata, BMW, and just last week Nissan, investing billions into automotive and electric vehicle manufacturing. Or Microsoft, announcing today £2.5 billion for critical AI infrastructure, in addition to all the leading AI labs who already have their European offices here. Or the Ellison Institute of Technology, confirming today £1 billion investment into their new Oxford site, researching and developing new technologies, including life sciences. And you can see that momentum, too, in our commitment to free trade. In the past year alone, we've secured new investment partnerships with the United States, Japan, and South Korea, worth more than £50 billion. We became only the first European country to join the fast-growing Trans-Pacific trade bloc, and hugely benefited from the sovereign investment partnership with the United Arab Emirates, deploying over £14 billion into the UK in a little over 2 years. And all of that is why this country is the one with the fastest investment growth anywhere in the G7. So when I say that this country can be the best place in the world to invest and to do business, you should believe me, and believe me because of 3 big competitive advantages that we have. Our low tax approach, our culture of innovation, and our people. Firstly, tax. The purest expression of this government's economic philosophy is that people and businesses make far better decisions about their own money than any government could. And I believe that allowing you to keep more of the return on your capital, our country becomes more competitive as a place to invest, grow, and create jobs. And make no mistake, we are cutting taxes. Not only do we have the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7, last week we announced that we would make full expensing permanent. That means you can write off the cost of many capital investments in full. It makes our capital allowances regime one of the most generous in the world, and it was the biggest business tax cut in modern British history. And that's not all. We've got lower capital gains tax rates than France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Some of the most generous tax reliefs on stock options anywhere in the world, and we're cutting personal taxes to a 27...
That's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak there talking at Hampton Court Palace at this Global Investment Summit. The problem, Piers, he started out fairly well, fairly warm. He sounds like he's talking to huge corporations, to globalist agenda, people who've got a global vision. He's not talking to the shopkeeper, the business owner, the plumber, the decorator. How does he get that message across to them?
Well, of course, it is an investment summit he's speaking at, don't forget. So it is that kind of audience.
But he has, but they aren't necessarily going to vote for him. The Swedish investors in that room are not voting for him.
But to be fair, everyone who has a pension, invested in pension funds, invested in any kind of savings or equities, it affects them. Yeah. And this is immensely positive. This will do a great deal for the British economy, I have no doubt at all. But I do accept that he's not very good at inspiring the ordinary person. But neither was John Major. John Major was dull, boring, famously on Spitting Image, playing with grey peas, and everything was grey.
People like you can do for him? I mean, Thatcher was given voice training and projection. She wasn't a brilliant speaker, to be honest, was she?
No, but she knew how to limit her appearances and make an impact.
And we think,
unfortunately, these days, there's too much of politicians on television the whole time.
Talking to the wrong audience. Piers, thank you. So good to have you here. Right now, we told you that somebody had left the jungle. It's Grace Dent. She's left the jungle this morning. We believe it's on health grounds. There's a lot of speculation that she didn't look very well yesterday. She did do a trial. I don't know whether you were watching last night, Andrew Pearce, but she got selected to do the trial. So maybe something happened in the trial.
And she, of course, she's a food writer, so the trials are always quite interesting for a food writer. But interesting that they're not selecting Nigel Farage to do all the trials.
No, well, I mean, he hasn't actually been in the programmes as much as the others, so the edit's very clever because they kind of focus on the people who then inevitably get voted into the trials. But anyway, let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. And still to come, we've also got the greatest Christmas advert that you will see all year. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m.
We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So it was confirmed at the weekend that Terry Venables, who of course had a stellar career in football, was the former England manager, has died at the age of 80. Still with us in the studio is Piers Pottinger, founder of Europe's biggest PR agency, Bell Pottinger. Piers, in a colourful life that you've led, why am I not surprised? Not only did you know Terry Venables, you actually crossed swords with him.
I did. Well, I acted for him in his battle against Alan Sugar when Terry was chief executive of Tottenham Hotspur. And, of course, he was a cheeky chappy, very colourful, very charismatic. He was very good with the people, something Rishi Sunak could adopt. But when it came to business, Rishi was rather a long way ahead. And Terry, I'm afraid, and most of his business associates looked like characters from the Sweeney. They were dubious, to say the least. And Terry, actually, the other thing Terry wasn't very good at was paying his bills. And he didn't pay mine. And I sued him and won. He still didn't pay. And I asked the lawyers what to do, and they said, well, you can send the bailiffs round. So I rang him up and said, if you don't pay me by tomorrow, and I want a banker's draft, not one of your famous cheques, I will send the bailiffs round accompanied by a Sun photographer. And he said, you can't do that, I'm the England manager. So I pointed out that I was Scottish, and it didn't bother me that he was the England manager. I wanted my money, like any good Scot. And the next day, I got an envelope specially delivered. I opened it up, and it was a cheque, not a banker's draft, drawn on Mizrahi Bank, which is a rather obscure Israeli bank, not used by Hamas. And but the cheque was for the full amount. It was about £11,000. So I wasn't charging him a lot. And it was signed by Philip Green, no less, who bailed him out.
How interesting.
And that's my story about El Tel. And his then business associate, Eddie Ashby, who was the chief operating officer at Spurs under him. Eddie had done several stretches, some for GBH, some for ABH. He was a charming fellow as well. And It's a great pity because Tell was a very charismatic person and a naturally brilliant footballer. But when it came to business, he got involved with the wrong people. And one of the directors of Scribes was Bruce Reynolds,
That's the
great train robber.
Was he really?
Yeah, who I met there with Tell.
Brilliant. Thank you, Piers Passenger, thank you so much. Right, still to come, Cyber Them. David Tennant's Doctor Who has been scolded by a transgender character for calling an alien him during the first 60th anniversary special.
Isn't this ridiculous? And is this the best Christmas advert of the year? Bev and I think it probably is. We're going to show it to you in full in just a few minutes. Brace yourselves and have a hanky.
That's right, that and much more after your morning's news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. 10:33. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says he's committed to reducing net migration, admitting the numbers are still too high. His comments come as James Cleverly prepares to face questions in the Commons for the first time as Home Secretary. He's expected to address the latest figures, as well as the government's efforts to stop the boats after the Supreme Court ruled against the Rwanda scheme. Rishi Sunak says measures are being taken to tackle both issues.
Encouraging that the Office for National Statistics last week did say that the numbers are already slowing, but we need to do more. I've already taken action to tighten the number of dependents that students can bring when they come and study here. We'd seen a very sharp rise in those numbers, and that measure that I took represents the single biggest measure to bring down legal migration that anyone's ever taken. But of course, as we need to do more, we'll look at that, and where there are abuses of the system, we will of course act on that, because the levels do need to come down. They are too high.
Nearly £30 billion is being invested into new projects in the UK. The Prime Minister, who's been speaking at a global summit, says there's positive momentum in the economy, particularly for the science, tech and creative industries. Concerns have been raised over the list of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners due to be released today. Mediators say they're working with both sides to resolve issues on the final day of the agreed truce. Hamas has released dozens of women and children over the past 3 days. It's hoped the pause in fighting will be extended to allow for further exchanges. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2605 and 1.1511 euros. The price of gold, £1,597 and 71 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,456 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think.
I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 10:39. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
We are also delighted this morning to be joined by author and broadcaster Emma Wolfe and former Labour Party advisor Matthew Laza. Now, we know the John Lewis advert cost £1 million to create a 90-second clip. The shop then went on to spend £5 to £6 million promoting it. But there's an advert which has taken social media by storm. It is for a pub in Northern Ireland. It's left viewers in tears. Here it is.
God knows what is hiding in those weak and drunken hearts. Guess he kissed the girls and made them cry, those hard-faced queens of misadventure. God knows what is hiding in those weak and sunken lines, fiery thrones of muted angels, giving love but getting nothing back. Oh, people, help the people. And if you're homesick, give me your hand and I'll hold it. People, help the people. Nothing will drag you down. Oh, and if I had to bring, oh, and if I had to bring, I'd be cold as a stone ridge,
Log fire, lights on the mantelpiece.
Where's the Guinness?
There's the Guinness.
Guinness is coming up.
So the old guy takes
There he
his
is.
seat at the
He's
table,
got his Guinness.
gets his pint of Guinness, he's sat on his own, and the young couple in their early 20s, I guess, have a drink. Their little dog comes over to talk to him, so the dog makes the first introduction and says hello to the elderly gentleman.
He's sitting on the old man's lap, sitting next to him now.
And then the younger couple come over. My talking is ruining it for the viewers, but I'm conscious of people on the radio that might not know what's happening here. And the young couple
They come over to sit down, sit with him and their drinks.
shake his hand and say hello. And they cheers their drinks. Charlie's Bar, there are no strangers here. only friends you haven't met yet. And that's a W.B. Yeats quote. Oh, it's
lovely.
so lovely, isn't it?
And it's gone viral. It's huge.
I mean, it's just the power of social media, isn't it?
I know. It goes to the heart of Christmas, doesn't it? Got old people on their own, a nice young couple, the dog breaks the ice.
And totally rooted in place as well. That's what's different. So all these ads that we see, like the John Lewis ad and the other Christmas ads, I mean, you know, all shot in June in a studio. But that just gave us a real sense of Enniskillen as a place, didn't it? So that's what I really like. It did, actually. I'm feeling a bit tearing up.
Oh, yeah, I definitely have tears in my eyes. Look, I think this is really, really lovely, obviously, for Enniskillen and for the sort of localness of it all, but also loneliness is such a big issue for people of all ages. And I hate to bring up the pandemic, but it was one of the biggest consequences, mental health consequences, was anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and loneliness amongst young people, people of all ages.
And the elderly.
But the reminder that the elderly, and you can be lonely in a crowd, you can be lonely on your own, you can be, you know, it's just the idea, especially at this time of year, that just reach out and, you know, means more than Christmas presents or anything, is that you maybe talk to an elderly neighbour, check they're OK, that kind of thing. I think loneliness is one of the things in our society that people are ashamed of and that people live with and that people don't talk about, especially when they're older.
And I think one of the reasons it is so poignant, you mentioned the pandemic, you said we don't want to talk about it, but we have to, because during that time, we didn't say hello to healthy people. We didn't take our masks off. We didn't smile.
It was the wariness of other people.
It was wariness of strangers.
Yeah.
It was wariness of the people that you loved in your own family. We were brainwashed to be fearful of other human beings, and bringing people together like that, I love it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's completely vital. And as you say, Emma, this is the spirit of Christmas, is to actually go out and talk to somebody rather than, you know, buying flash presents in the shops that the other adverts are for. So, yeah, go out and chat.
But it shouldn't be only at Christmas, should it?
No, absolutely not.
It doesn't cost £1 million advert. It doesn't cost anything. It literally, it's the gift of your time. That you go up to someone in the street and say, how are you doing? Or sit next to someone on a park bench.
And what a lovely thing, the little dog goes over to wags his tail.
No, it's very cute.
It's so
very cute. And loneliness became a sort of issue that politicians about 2 or 3 years ago got really interested in. We briefly had a minister for loneliness, Tracy Crouch.
We did, and we had MPs standing up and talking about their own battles with loneliness and depression.
But it seems to have fallen off the agenda a little bit, doesn't it? I'm not sure that the minister's
These
been
things
replaced.
go in fashion and out of fashion.
And it needs to stay in fashion permanently, because it's a very big issue.
Right, I'm a Celebrity. Nigel Farage got into a bit of an argument last night in his second week in the jungle. This was about Brexit. Have a listen.
What's the 3 benefits of Brexit?
Self-government.
Which we already had.
We did not have. Fred, there's no point. If you believe that, you don't understand what the European Union is.
So what's the second benefit?
Well, hopefully take back our territorial waters.
But when I'm talking about benefits, I'm talking about something tangible.
All right, the nuclear submarine deal with Australia could not have been done as an European Union member because France already had a contract. Simple as.
But we could have done it with France.
Don't make me laugh.
In fact, the French were really off about that.
Of course they were. Good. A lot of people in life are persuadable. Fred Sirax is not one of them. But the point about it is, we can make a mess of it ourselves if we choose to. And
that's what we are doing.
And I've always argued that.
Nigel looking very well there. It agrees with him, this, doesn't it? Not drinking, not having coffee.
Probably smoking a lot less.
But Matthew...
Are they rationed on the cigs?
Because they're not to be seen smoking on camera.
Yes.
Matthew, what he says there about some people can be persuaded and some people can't, that conversation has been had in front rooms and offices all around the country for the last 6 years.
Absolutely. I mean, what I liked about it was a sensible, grown-up conversation with actually based in fact. We saw the conversation about whether Nigel was pro or anti-immigration with Nella Rose was somewhat less calm.
She's been quite pleasant to him on day one.
Yeah.
And now she's accusing him of being a racist. And when she was challenged about why do you say he's racist, I read it on the internet.
And don't come to South London because nobody likes you.
I mean, come on.
Absolutely. So this was, look, I mean, I agree with Fred and not with Nigel, unsurprisingly. But as you say, it is a sensible conversation that they were having based on fact.
We've got the Prime Minister today hailing £30 billion of inward investment today in this country from countries all around the world, from Taiwan, Sweden, Germany.
I've got a fact for you there, Andrew. In 2015, we were getting 22% of Europe's inward investment, and it's fallen to 15 since Brexit. So, yes, it's good to see that it hasn't gone off a cliff, but it has gone down.
There's figures, there's some figures.
You could say that we should be investing in our own country and, you know, geeing up our own economy. I found it really bizarre, that sort of, you know, that midgy kind of hot jungle feeling, and then they start discussing Brexit and the nuclear deterrent and the issues with France. It's very odd, but it was always going to be about Brexit, wasn't it, when people attack Nigel?
Yeah.
I like Nigel's... when Fred says we could have done a deal with France, I like Nigel's please. Sassy.
He's looking very, very well. And as for all the sniggering about his bottom, I think most 59-year-olds would be quite pleased to look in. I think he's looking in very good shape.
Did you study his bottom?
What? Did I say bottom?
Did you study it?
I didn't study it, but it was lots of clips of the
There was a lot of it.
How are they meant to
Well, I'll tell you what I like.
He is in pretty good shape.
I think he's in very good
But
shape.
so is Fred. I mean, there's some good stories this morning saying that, you know, Fred is an example to all middle-aged men can get abs, and that we should be following we're following Fred's example.
And it's nice
We're going to get down the gym afterwards, Andrew. We're going to spot for
not
each
to be
other.
gazing at women the whole time. Do you remember Mylene Klass's infamous bikini shower scene? It's nice that we're perving on men for once and looking at their bottoms on national television.
Yeah, but they're the subject of discussion.
Nigel's legal team came out over the weekend and said that they've complained to ITV about his bottom being shown live onto
He wouldn't care,
on
but he
TV.
wouldn't care, would he? He wouldn't want that, I don't think. I mean, they can't speak to him.
I think that the suggestion being that he hadn't okayed having his bum shown on TV.
It's a bit weird if you're taking a shower as you need to and you're being filmed. There must be rules about what they can and cannot film.
And of course, the contract will be that thick, won't it?
And we're talking about it.
And
exactly, which is the main thing.
What
Nigel wants, isn't it?
Exactly. So you do watch the show then, Matthew?
I'm watching more on social media than on the whole show.
We're learning that journalist Grace Dent, the food
she's out.
Yes, absolutely.
She's this morning, so we're not quite sure why health.
I found out the other day a friend of mine went on a date with her when they were at university.
Oh,
yeah.
And
was she fun?
It was very pleasant, but it didn't go anywhere.
Right. Now, are you a fan of Nella?
You've not been on a date.
I'm not a fan of Nella.
You're not a fan of Nella?
No, I'm not a fan of Nella. I thought she made Nigel.
Nella?
I'm a fan of Fred. I want Fred to win.
We've not been on a date with Grace Dent, but we'll let that go.
I want to go on first dates.
You've got a mic on, I heard.
You want to go on first dates?
Right, can we
you
move
need to
on?
get to know Fred.
Exactly.
We talk about the royal family. Prince William's allies have said it's outrageous that he could have been briefing against Prince Harry. It's a mess, this, Matthew.
It's an absolute mess, and I think if Meghan thinks she's doing herself a service by briefing him, then she's very much mistaken, because it's... I mean, this has got a sort of whiff of desperation about it. With these royal biographies, there's always one that sort of, you know, makes a big splash, and then, of course, they like the money, they like the attention, and then the royal biographer goes off, and it becomes a law of... writes another one, and then another one, and it's very much a law of diminishing returns. I mean, Andrew Morton, what's he called? Morton, yeah. Andrew Motion's the poet laureate.
He is.
I don't want to get the two
Do not confuse them.
Poet laureate, class here.
Yeah.
He kept writing effectively the same book.
Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, go and find another subject.
But
and
also, just to say briefly, there was a speculation that perhaps they could have some form of rapprochement after the so-called phone call between Harry...
We're sure the phone call happened, are we?
Which was leaked on Harry's side. It was leaked it was going to happen in advance.
This is so ludicrous. This is the pot calling the kettle black. Omid Scobie has been, you know, as they say, Meghan's mouthpiece. Now they're trying to counter-brief and say that William has been leaking about Harry and Meghan. He really, as Matthew says, this is the second book he's written attacking the royals. He's trying to do the same thing all over again. It's not a royal biography. It's a collection of things that we've already heard, things that we know about the royals, the detail about Prince Charles wanting someone to put his toothpaste on his toothbrush in the morning.
Old as a hills.
It's his cutting job, isn't it?
Yeah, old as a hills, that story.
And you have to be very sceptical when they talk about friends of Prince William have been leaking sources. It's very... None of it is based in fact. None of it is sourced.
No. The story about ironing his shoelaces, when I was on the Times, I wrote the denial of that story 20 years ago. Yeah. Because it came out, someone said...
You were
he demands to have his shoelaces ironed. And it was so ridiculous.
And I think that the inner circle of the firm have actually maintained a very dignified silence. William and King Charles, in the face of outrageous allegations, probably libelous allegations, they have kept they've retained their dignity and they haven't hit back.
No,
yeah, absolutely. Played a blinder since the coronation. Really,
I think they have.
So there are two kind of gender issue stories which sort of sit together.
Aren't there always?
Doctor Who, David Tennant's is told off by a transgender alien when Doctor Who presumes that he's a him. It's just like...
Dares to use a pronoun.
Yeah.
And then also but this one I find a little more chilling, Emma, which is about that newborn babies are now being registered as the gender they identify as when they're born, as opposed to their biological sex.
How can a baby identify as
How
anything?
can a baby identify as anything? This is not this obsession with gender ideology, gender identity. This is about newborn babies. This report says that midwives are actually living in a climate of fear. In a midwifing centre, in a birthing centre, in a hospital, it should be about healthy mother, healthy baby, a safe birth. That is it. They should not be worrying about referring to chest feeding and birthing parent and all these terms, which I think Bev and I probably find very, very offensive, actually, because women give birth, women have babies.
Do. And women breastfeed.
I actually know a parent who's bringing up her child as gender neutral. I completely disagree, but that is a choice for a parent.
How old are they? How old's the child?
The child, they are 3 now.
Wow.
Exactly the same age as my son. This child has no he or she. This child is gender neutral. But OK, fine, that's a choice for the parents. But the idea that you impose this on midwives and on medical professionals and that they have to skate around these ludicrous, kind of socially invented issues, I think is really, really
But is it a boy or a girl, though, the gender-neutral child?
I won't say. I know, because I've changed their nappy when they were a baby. So I've seen their genitalia. But no, I wouldn't say that. But
what's the parent basing the decision on their own
Their logic
instinct?
is what? What is their logic? That gender is a social construct?
That we are imposing on children.
Oh, I'm totally, in favour of mixing up the pink and the blue. It's, absolutely.
No stereotype.
This is the hospital. This is my local hospital. So if I was going to give birth, that's where it would be. Obviously, I'm not. The hospital in itself, in its defence, is saying that they've imported an American IT system. And look, let's be thankful at least they bought a computer system and they're not still using faxes, as we were reminded last week.
The thing is, of course, which has cost £450 million to the taxpayer.
So they're saying that they're going to change it, and that it just slipped through the net. However, as Emma says, for a £450 million system, you think you'd have checked what the drop-down boxes said, wouldn't you?
But you know what? There's been a group of influential doulas who have been going into hospitals, because I wrote a book 10 years ago called The Happy Birth Book, and ran antenatal classes for a long time. And there was a group of midwives, doulas, going in to be paid by the NHS into maternity units to educate them on this issue. And it's been a very pernicious and very powerful movement. A bit like sort of Stonewall. It started out with good intentions.
Too powerful.
Right. Moving on, ministers have been accused of covering up a shadowy army unit who spied on critics of lockdown. David Davis is one of them. He'll be here in just a moment. Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. It's going to be a cold week this week. Today, skies getting a little brighter in the west, but staying fairly dull and damp across the east, close to this area of low pressure that's just heading out into the North Sea. But it's sending in plenty of showers, and we've seen these weather fronts providing quite a bit of damp weather for Monday morning. That rain is scooting away. Wales slowly turning brighter this afternoon. Parts of Western Scotland, Northern Ireland also fine with some sunny spells. But there is a cold wind blowing, and many eastern areas just keeping the cloud and outbreaks of rain, and that brisk wind really making it feel pretty chilly on those North Sea coasts. Double digits in the southwest, but even here the colder air will spread in overnight. The rain will tend to clear from the south. We'll keep showers coming into eastern England through the night, and then more showers coming into northeast Scotland. Could have a bit of snow mixed in over the hills. It'll turn quite frosty across central and southern Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland. In the south, temperatures just about holding above freezing thanks to a bit more cloud, but for most it's going to feel pretty cold through Tuesday. Quite a few of us seeing a fair bit of sunshine, early cloud in the south and the odd shower clearing away. More showers will come into northeast Scotland. Increasingly, we'll start to see some snow mixed in with those. But for many, actually, tomorrow's a bright, fine day with sunny spells. But it is going to be chilly and it stays cold all week.
Well, thanks, Alex. Still to come, it's the final day of the temporary truce between Hamas and Israel. Calls for it to be extended, but will that happen? We'll have the latest with Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Can you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Monday the 27th of November. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Boris blasts anti-Semitism. Tens of thousands of people marched through London at a demonstration against anti-Semitism this weekend. Former PM Boris Johnson told us why he was there.
What we've seen is, I'm afraid, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism and a failure to focus on the appalling terroristic acts of Hamas.
And good news, billions of investment. The Prime Minister laid out his intention to British business in a speech earlier in a bid to drum up foreign investment. Here he is.
We are setting about making this the best place in the world to invest and do business.
And covert 19 ministers have been accused of a cover-up after it was revealed that soldiers did secretly spy on British critics of the government's response to COVID.
And already so many people getting in touch because they loved that Christmas ad.
Yeah.
Did you see it? In the Northern Ireland pub in Enniskillen. 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, not a word said, didn't need to be said, it was just beautiful.
Yeah. Let us know your thoughts this morning, gbviews at gbnews.com. But first, here's Tatiana Sanchez in the GB Newsroom.
Bev, thank you very much. It's 1 minute past 11. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says he's committed to reducing net migration, admitting the numbers are still too high. His comments come as James Cleverly prepares to face questions in the Commons for the first time as Home Secretary. He's expected to address the latest figures, as well as the government's efforts to stop the boats after the Supreme Court ruled against the Rwanda scheme. Nearly £30 billion is being invested into new projects in the UK. The Prime Minister has told the Global Investment Summit there's positive momentum in the economy, particularly for the science, tech and creative industries. Rishi Sunak says the UK's low-tax approach and culture of innovation give it a competitive advantage when it comes to business.
We are setting about making this the best place in the world to invest and do business. Now, I'm unashamedly proud of Britain, and there is a growing momentum right here in the UK right now. Don't just take my word for it. PwC's survey this year of thousands of global CEOs rated the UK the most attractive investment destination in Europe.
Concerns have been raised over the list of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners due to be released today. Mediators say they're working with both sides to resolve issues on the final day of the agreed truce. Hamas has released dozens of women and children over the past 3 days. It's hoped the pause in fighting will be extended to allow for further exchanges. Meanwhile, the International Committee of the Red Cross is warning the humanitarian situation in Gaza is still desperate, with spokesperson Matthew Morris saying the healthcare system is on the verge of collapse.
The intensity of the fighting in Gaza has meant that humanitarians have obviously struggled to do what is needed. And we know, I'm sure your viewers who've been following this in recent weeks have known how difficult it is to get aid supplies in, but also to get people out.
Israel has told the US its campaign in Gaza will resume with full force once the temporary truce comes to an end. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, who's faced criticism after anti-Semitic content appeared on his social media site, has landed in Tel Aviv. He's due to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu later. The tech entrepreneur says he's against anything that promotes hate and conflict. The trial of 2 teenagers accused of murdering transgender teen Brianna Gay starts today. The 16-year-old was found with fatal stab wounds in a park in Cheshire in February. A boy and a girl, both 15 at the time, were arrested and charged with the murder. The defendants, who cannot be named because of their age, both deny the murder. The trial is expected to last 3 to 4 weeks. Some breaking news to bring you. Around 50 Barclays Bank branches have been forced to close after activists glued their doors shut. Extinction Rebellion says it's holding the biggest fossil fuel financer in Europe accountable for its climate-wrecking crimes. We'll have more on this breaking story later. And drivers are being warned to avoid puddles after a record number of pothole breakdowns. The AA says it received more than 52,000 call-outs last month for vehicles caught out by damaged roads. That's the most for any October on record. Earlier this month, the Prime Minister pledged to deal with the scourge of potholes, but the cost of tackling the issue is estimated at around £14 billion. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Welcome back, it's 11:05. We're just talking about that pothole story. It's like we're living in a third world country, isn't it? It's like, or medieval England maybe. The fact that we have to be told as drivers, avoid a puddle because there might be a pothole under it. In fact, one of our viewers got in touch and said, I will just find it. Where is it? Hold the line, caller. And of course, it was very perceptive, I thought. Here we go, Saul. Yeah. Thank you, Saul. Yeah. He said, £29.5 billion. That's what's being invested in Hampton Court today. Everyone's making a fuss. He said that could fill a lot of potholes. Yeah. And that's the problem, isn't it? We feel like, great, you've got all this 30 billion that's going to be given to your tech giant mates. What about the country that's not working?
And if you remember when they cancelled the leg of HS2 going up to Manchester, which they cancelled during the Tory conference, which was in Manchester, in a former railway station, they said a lot of the billions and millions would be spent fixing potholes. Well, get on with it.
Honestly, it's ridiculous. You all have been getting in touch about the advert for Charlie's Bar.
Yes, it's charming.
And saying how much you love it. And Bernard said anything would be better than the John Lewis advert this year. I thought the old man advert you showed was a real tearjerker. And Carola says, oh my gosh, I'm a crying mess. Wow, that was beautiful. Michelle says it made me cry. I don't know why. Happy Christmas. Don't say Happy Christmas too early. I will not say that yet. And Linda says, all right, lads and lasses, who's cutting the onions? A few of you have moved to tears.
I did warn you, you're going to need your tissues, because it was very charming and very lovely. And the idea that that might be played out in real life all over the country is really encouraging.
Yeah, talk to strangers in pubs.
Yeah,
I love talking to strangers.
And that's one of the sad reasons about old pubs closing down. Often you'd see the old man with his pint of bitter might be there for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Hoping to talk to someone, read the newspaper.
I got chatting to a bloke in a pub just a little while.
Well, not for the first time.
he was just sat on his own, old guy, and he had the fire on. And it was a bit like that. We were in Oxfordshire. And a little place called Christmas Common. And then he was talking about that he paid in cash. That's what caught my eye. And I said to him, oh, it's interesting you've paid in cash. He said, I haven't got a bank account.
Amazing.
And then I said, where do you get your news? And he said, I watch a channel called GBNews. And I said, oh, hello. I've clearly not got my makeup on. You don't recognise me in real life.
Well, that's good. But he's not alone in paying cash. I often pay cash in pubs and restaurants and bars and cafes. Bev thinks it's hilarious. We've got Charlie with us in the studio, that I've still got a chequebook.
But you don't know what a chequebook is, do you, Charlie?
I have to cash in a cheque every now and again when you get reimbursed or something. It's always a massive strain having to walk into my bank.
Because they're particularly at the moment because Extinction Rebellion
just blew the doors shut this morning on some of them.
Flipping horrible people. Now, look, the 4-day pause in fighting between Hamas and Israel may continue if more hostages are released by Gaza. And, of course, that would mean some Palestinians in Israeli jails would be released.
So, Charlie Peters is here, as we've just mentioned, not just to talk about chequebooks, but to talk about this, Charlie. It's been somewhat of a relief, this pause in hostilities over the weekend, a huge relief. Obviously, we've seen the pictures of families being reunited, which have been very beautiful. But all of those stories, some of them are quite sort of touched with sadness as well, because some of those children who are being released, their parents are not there to meet them.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, so many orphans, families reunited. Many of them, of course, immediately rushed to hospital because they've been kept in such austere and punishing conditions. Yesterday, I spoke to the family of Maya Regev. When we were in Israel, we met her mother. She was hoping that her children would be released. Just one of them has now. Maya was rushed to hospital for urgent surgery on her leg, which was threatened with amputation due to an infection. A gunshot wound suffered on October the 7th and being kept in such poor medical care for that period. Now, the family expressed some joy that Maya was back, but their son, Itai, a fighting-age male, as the Gazans would see him, being kept behind. And so they are releasing, so far, women and children first, and they're retaining what the Gazans and Hamas would feel as high-value hostages are still being retained. So it was interesting last night, I thought, that they released a joint Israeli-American civilian. That 4-year-old girl was one of those that they released. A sort of sign, perhaps, towards Joe Biden that they could release more American hostages, showing that keep the pressure up, Washington, and we'll extend the ceasefire and give you more. Because they hold 20 Americans. Those are the real bankers for Hamas. That is keeping this truce open so far. And it seems that all parties want this truce to be extended, which is very fragile. And even Israel has said that they'd be happy to do it if they could extend it by a day, if 10 more were released. But that Israeli message also kind of quietly tainted with a statement that they are willing to continue their fight for victory. Netanyahu, inside Gaza Strip, the first Israeli leader inside the Strip since 2005, stood on a tank in military fatigues. This is not the most peaceful ceasefire you could think of. You can be sure that the IDF right now is developing its intelligence products, rearming, re-preparing, and getting set to go again, and what will almost certainly be a devastating second phase of this conflict.
Hamas, likewise, the same, Charlie, because they've been... They've suffered a series of punishing military blows, but they too can now be regrouping in their tunnels.
Absolutely, it's an area of 2 layers. A civilian layer on the top and a military layer underneath that subterranean labyrinth where terrorists gather. Now, the Israeli military fought armoured divisions in the north to seize Gaza City and North Gaza, but it's almost certainly the case that some Hamas fighters remain in the north. That won't be an entirely secure ground as they look to move south. And those fighters, we know that they will remove their military fatigues as they head south. They will blend into the civilian populace and re-emerge as and when they are required to inflict punishment onto the IDF. And so that next phase will be brutal, especially as there are 2 million civilians in the south. That is severely restricted terrain. And we have seen, I think, the IDF almost flying blind in its approach to civilians in the Gaza Strip. They don't really have a strategy for dealing with them.
Hamas don't care about their own civilians.
Well, there we go. They're happy to use them as human shields. They're happy to use them as human shields and to become them when it suits them, to remove those weapons and then rearm and re-prepare when the opportunity appears.
Of course, Netanyahu in his military fatigues, he's under huge political pressure, isn't he? Because his government is being blamed for the shocking breach of security that enabled the Hamas fighters to strike on October the 7th.
There has been, it's unquestionable, there have been ginormous leadership and political failures, even since the start of this war, some strategic blunders throughout. But it was interesting to see this war cabinet attempt to kind of re-establish victory on the information war, on the propaganda front, recently with this hostages situation, actually naming the potential prisoners that they would release if Hamas gave up more Israelis and joint nationals. Because that, for so long in this conflict, Israeli families have been speaking to Netanyahu, well, I say speaking to, being very aggressively towards him, saying, you have let down our families, please release them. If the Israelis say to the Palestinians, here's who we will release, those Palestinian families can then turn to Hamas and say, well, come on, why are you holding up the release of my father or my mother, even if they are a terrorist who's committed appalling atrocities inside the West Bank or Israel? This is an opportunity for the Israeli side to put that pressure on the Palestinians, on Hamas, to say, bring our families home as well.
What a complicated,
really is
messy the situation. This is not going to have any sort of resolution, Charlie, before the end of this year, at the least, is it?
No, this conflict will roll on, and I think this next phase of the conflict, this more decisive phase moving into the south, that will. I mean, there's no understanding of what the kind of post-war plan is.
That's right.
That's still so vague. That's one of those strategic blunders I was talking about. There's been no attempt to voice an explanation of what they're going to do next. And before they can even reach that, they've got the most difficult part of the conflict to come. They've sent all those civilians to the south, and now they have to somehow clear out Hamas and protect as much of that civilian infrastructure as possible. If they're going to do extreme bombing campaigns, as they did at the start, and targeted precision munitions, that's going to be an extremely delicate and, well, devastating situation.
Maintaining the international coalition supporting Israel, though, that is so far holding up well.
Yeah, well, it's two sides. It's pretty clear which one you want to be on if you're part of the law-abiding international community. But it gets tougher to support Israeli action as the intensity of the fighting grows and the opportunity for risk to civilian life grows with it. Those 2 million in the south, the humanitarian corridor that they're being kept in that area of just 14 square kilometres is very small, okay? And it's not habitable. It's sandy areas. This is a former Bedouin camp. This is a place where people would live with tents. There are 8 refugee camps in the Gaza Strip already. The UN don't want a 9th.
OK. We're going to be talking to the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, I believe, in just a few moments, Jake Wallace-Simons, because we want to know what he thinks about the march to the weekend, because, of course, Boris Johnson was there, which was... it was a gift for the march because, of course, everybody wants to hear what Boris Johnson has to say, and it means that we have been running it all weekend, and lots of other news organisations will run it. The significance of someone like him there can't be underestimated, can it?
Yeah, and he wasn't alone in terms of the political figures there. We also saw Robert Jenrick stood alongside, and
Immigration Minister.
Yeah, and Labour and Tory MPs actually speaking positively about each other at that event. So a sort of that cross-party unity. Which
Tom Tugendhat was there. I saw
the Security Minister, very significant presence for the Security Minister to be there, considering what we've seen about pro-terror incidents on previous demonstrations in the capital. Quite significant for him to be there.
An absence of senior Labour politicians, though.
Yeah, I think I read Peter Carr was there, Shadow Minister. But if you think of the inner circle, Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner.
Even a former Labour leader. There's nobody there.
They weren't there.
No.
But he's got a lot of difficulties, Keir Starmer, in trying to keep this coalition going because so many Labour MPs have defied his position because he won't call for a ceasefire.
Well, speaking about fragile situations, that's certainly one of them. And one of the interesting areas of work for the GBNews Investigates team in the last few weeks is seeing the number of Labour councillors openly riding the central leadership, the London leadership's position, and often going a bit too far in their opposition to that position. We've seen several Labour councillors forced out of their posts as a consequence of GB News investigates reporting on anti-Semitic cartoons, campaigning statements. And here's the thing, every time we catch them out and we share this information with the Labour Party, the Labour politician resigns and pretends they resigned a week before we found what they said.
They don't want to give you the scalp.
It doesn't work. We always call them out.
Well, one of our viewers got in touch, Paul, and he said, I watched your coverage of the demonstration in London yesterday. I was shocked, upset and very angry that not a top Labour official attended. It just shows it's all talk with them and I won't be voting for them. Keep up the good work. Thank you. OK, lots more to come this morning. You are with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11:20 with Britain's News on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So tens of thousands of people attended a march against anti-Semitism in London on Sunday over fears about the rising number of attacks on Jewish people in this country.
The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was among those, and he told GB News why he was there.
What we're all doing here, and the only thing we're really doing, is showing solidarity with Jewish people. And that's necessary because since October the 7th, I'm afraid there's been a very peculiar response in many parts of the world, including, I'm sad to say, in London. And what we've seen is, I'm afraid, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism and a failure to focus on the appalling terroristic acts of Hamas.
So Boris Johnson there, in what we think is a Grimsby Town Football Club bobble hat. It's been bugging me all morning.
Why would he wear a Grimsby Town Football Club?
I have absolutely no idea.
He's not a football fan.
No. Well, let's speak now to the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons. Morning, Jake. Good to see you. How much of a boost is it for an event like this to have Boris Johnson there talking to the media?
I think it was fantastic of him to come. I mean, the rally yesterday was historic. It was incredible. It was the biggest, we think, since the Battle of Cable Street in 1936. And yet, on the whole, the political turnout was not as impressive as we would have hoped. We had a wonderful appearance by Robert Jenrick, by Tom Tugendhat, and by Peter Kyle for Labour. But there were no leaders of either the opposition or of the Tory party. There were very few proper front bench figures there, or shadow front bench figures. And so it felt a little bit poor, really, from that point of view. So it was nice to see Boris there in the crowd, at least.
Why weren't they there? Because we've had weeks and weeks of these pro-Palestinian marches with all the ensuing controversies. You say this was the most well-attended march since the Cable Street demos back in the 1930s. It seems it would have been a great opportunity for politicians to have been there, even if they were just there for an hour.
Exactly. You'd have thought this would be the obvious thing to do, to stand up not just for the Jewish community, but we're standing up for British values. We were standing against bigotry, against illiberalism, and standing up for democracy. The people there on the streets were chanting frequently for peace. There wasn't a single person there, I don't think, who had anything against any Muslim or Palestinian. All we wanted really was to stand up to the haters, to the bigots, to the people who stand against everything that Britain holds dear. So it would have been obvious for politicians to come along in greater numbers and in higher profile to make that point. I just don't know why they didn't. I've heard various theories, which I probably shouldn't go into because they're sort of about internal politicking. But basically, I think it was rather a poor show. At this time, we've got to put values first and put minorities first and put the things that we believe in first ahead of any petty political calculations.
Jake, do you think enough people in this country, it worries me a lot, understand what anti-Semitism means? They just... I've talked to younger people and they look blank, and I say, it's all about hatred of Jewish people. Oh, no, it's all about hating Israel. No, it's about hating Jewish people. Do you think people understand it properly even today?
Can you hear us, Jake?
I'm sorry, Andrew, the sound appears...
Oh, I think we might be losing Jake.
Are we losing Jake? Have we still got Jake? I
think you make a good point. I don't think a lot of people do understand.
I really don't think they understand the expression, what it means. Semite, anti-Semite, and Jewish hating is a very ugly expression, but that's essentially what it means.
It's also it's completely irrational. I mean, I know all racism is irrational. Yeah. Of course it is. The idea that you would treat people with discrimination based on their immutable characteristics, or that whatever they were born, whether that's melanin in their skin or their religion, maybe you wouldn't necessarily put it into that. But the culture that a person has been born into, that you would discriminate against them. And I think a lot of people don't. It's easy to understand racism when you can look at somebody, and I'm not excusing what I'm saying. Children, in particular, young people might understand that sort of the racism that Black Lives Matter responded to, that sort of thing. But I think when it comes to anti-Semitism, it is much harder to understand because it just is not visual, I guess, is what I'm saying. And so, particularly for young people who haven't grown up with a memory of what happened in war.
And of course, so many people now. I mean, I've got a neighbour who was part of the Holocaust, so those stories are fascinating. But she's in her 90s.
Yeah. So it's sort of fading memory, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. We are going to go to the COVID inquiry because that towering political figure, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is about to give evidence. Let's go over... I think he's giving evidence now. We're going to go and have a listen to what he's got to say.
and so forth. So I couldn't disagree with him saying the impact on the markets and so forth. My frustration for the 24 hours of this virus spreading, what impact would that have on the financial markets, on our productivity and so forth?
It's an example of, in this case, the Prime Minister trying to balance the health impacts against the economic impacts of taking these decisions.
We didn't get a chance to discuss it.
Well, you're right. He'd already taken that decision and told you of his decision.
That's right.
We see there a reference to the COBRA for the next day. That was Friday, the 20th of March. You attended that COBRA meeting as well, did you not?
Yes, I did, yeah.
And it was this COBRA meeting, if we look at paragraph 94 of your statement, please, about 4 lines down, you say, the PM was not at this COBRA meeting, which I found extraordinary given the circumstances. Did you ask, were you told why the Prime Minister was not at that COBRA meeting?
I can't remember. It must have been raised, but I can't remember the explanation why he wasn't there.
Do you remember having any reaction to whatever explanation you were given?
It surprised me because one of the huge advantages of the Prime Minister chairing COBRA is often, not unreasonably, there'll be different points of view. And the Prime Minister, as the boss, can arbitrate on the different points of view. To paraphrase you, can balance those points of view. And with respect to Michael Gove as the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, if there was a difference, it's quite difficult for him to arbitrate and decide, although to give Michael Gove credit, he did.
In any event, you can't. We may well hear from Mr. Johnson, but you can't remember why it was that he wasn't at that meeting. Later on in this paragraph, you describe a sort of shifting. Initially, the meeting being in favour of pushing off the closure of hospitality venues into the weekend, but a counter-argument being made that it should be that day, at the end of the day on that Friday.
That's right.
And in the end, that other argument, the Friday argument, prevailing.
That's right. This was to Michael Gove's credit. He decided to agree with those of us lobbying for Friday night rather than Saturday.
There's one more sequence of exchanges between you and the Prime Minister that I want to ask you about in this sort of part of the chronology, and that is a letter you wrote and then a call you had with him on Sunday, the 22nd of March. Let's look, please, at the letter first. So that is 118939. So let's remind ourselves, as I say, Mr. Khan, this was the Sunday just before the lockdown was announced. In fact, the next day. One gets the impression from your statement you were at home on that day, but you wrote this letter from home.
Yep.
And sent it to him by email.
So that's Sadiq Khan in the COVID inquiry being interviewed by one of the other lawyers, that's Andrew O'Connor. He appears to be sulking a little that he wasn't consulted by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was telling him what the government was doing.
Sadiq Khan always has a manner of being slightly sulky about him, doesn't he? We're seeing a letter here that he obviously wrote. I think this is at the time. We're looking at that he felt like he was defending his City of London and that Boris Johnson wasn't necessarily making the right decisions. And of course he will be making political capital out of this. That's precisely what Sadiq Khan does in any situation. Sadiq Khan does what's right for Sadiq Khan.
Yeah.
I was going to say for the Labour Party, but most of the time I'm not even sure he's that bothered about that.
No, I mean, he's fallen out with the Labour leader over at Gaza, of course.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting when I haven't a lot of time for Sadiq Khan, as you well know. I've got a lot more time for the Mayor of Greater Manchester,
Me too.
Andy Burnham. He's giving evidence this afternoon, I think.
Yeah,
and of
he
course,
is.
He had that. Do you remember the very celebrated standoff with Boris Johnson, where he actually did a press conference in the street with all the other mayors, and they all had to stand so many feet apart because they brought in yet more restrictions. Was it Tier 3? Remember those?
Do you remember when they wouldn't allow Manchester to go into a lesser tier?
Yeah.
And Andy Burnham was fighting furiously to have the people of his city released from their imprisonment.
And he won.
You can't believe it happened, can you?
He won the standoff.
Yeah, I think he did.
Because he's a clever telegenic communicator.
Yeah.
So we'll keep you up to date with what's happening there in the COVID inquiry.
It's hard to make out. Because do you know what they do? Lawyers will never use 10 words when they can use 1,000 words, will they? So they drag it on. They drag it on and on and on and on, so making a load of money.
They're posturing.
Right, still to come this morning. A risk to us all, maybe. Former PM Liz Truss says that the US President Joe Biden must be voted out to make the world a safer place. I agree with her. We're going to discuss this with our panel. That and much more after your morning's news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. 11:31. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says he's committed to reducing net migration, admitting the numbers are still too high. His comments come as James Cleverly prepares to face questions in the Commons for the first time as Home Secretary. He is expected to address the latest figures as well as the government's efforts to stop the boats after the Supreme Court ruled against the Rwanda scheme. Rishi Sunak says measures being taken to tackle both issues. Nearly £30 billion is being invested into new projects in the UK. The Prime Minister has told the Global Investment Summit there's positive momentum in the economy, particularly for the science, tech and creative industries. Rishi Sunak says the UK's low-tax approach and culture of innovation give it a competitive advantage when it comes to business. Concerns have been raised over the list of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners to be released today. Mediators say they're working with both sides to resolve issues on the final day of the agreed truce. Hamas has released dozens of women and children over the past 3 days. It's hoped the pause in fighting will be extended to allow for further exchanges. Around 50 Barclays Bank branches have been forced to close after activists superglued their doors shut. Extinction Rebellion says it's holding the biggest fossil fuel financier in Europe accountable for its climate-wrecking crimes. It's accused the bank of ignoring advice from the International Energy Agency and prioritising short-term profits. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2622 and €1.1525. The price of gold, £1,595 and 84 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,473 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come, a Hindu family in Birmingham say that they've been living in a state of fear after being victim to religiously motivated harassment. Our award-winning reporter, that's right, Jack Carson, he went to find out more. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11:38 with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, and we're joined by our author and broadcaster Emma Wolfe and former Labour advisor Matthew Larson, who was telling me some fascinating gossip actually about the Labour Party, but I'm not to talk about that right now.
Don't get me into trouble.
Okay,
a lot of
gossip around here today. A lot of gossip today, yes, exactly. Now, a young Hindu family in Birmingham say they've been living in a state of fear after they were targeted by youth with religiously motivated harassment and attacks on their home.
So our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, went to find out the story.
This is the moment a group of boys attack the home of a young Hindu family in Birmingham. The family, who wish to remain anonymous, moved to the UK from India and have lived in the city for 8 years with their young daughter. After moving into a new house 2 years ago, they finally got to hold a housewarming party and, as is Hindu tradition, displayed religious signs on the front of their home. Shortly afterwards, in July, the first incident occurred.
At around 8 o'clock p.m. we heard a big bang, and when we first saw in the video footage, we have seen that someone has stepped on the door and kicked our door with their foot. It happened a couple of times, and that's how it started.
As the harassment continued, the family tried to confront those responsible, but they were met with the Islamic slur kafir, an offensive term directed at non-Muslims.
You are a kafir.
Over the next couple of months, a further 4 incidents occurred. The same youths also targeted the family when they tried to visit the Ladywood Leisure Centre.
We were entering and they saw us, okay, and they just grabbed, surrounded us. This is the first time I'm experiencing like someone is surrounding us and saying some bad stuff, and they grabbed him, my husband, and they started like saying, "We'll punch you on your face."
And tell me, how did that make you feel?
I was just shivering outside and just continuously crying, yeah.
They had really had several panic attacks. My daughter also did not want to sleep in this home. She was so terrified, and she didn't want to come back, and that's the impact what she had. So that couple of months we felt really like living in a prison.
The incidents were reported to the West Midlands Police, and in emails shown to GB News, they tell the family they've spoken to all the identifiable youths and that the youths admitted to the harassment. The police have told the family they won't investigate the incidents as hate crimes due to there being insufficient evidence to prove the racially motivated comments beyond a reasonable doubt. All of the doorbell footage has been passed on to the police. Instead, they're going forward with a community resolution, which they say will give the children conditions not to attend the family's home address again and not to approach them. The family don't believe this is enough.
He said, we have to go to this one and it's not your choice, it's our choice, like the community resolution. That's what. And the email, if you see, it's very, very, very rude. It felt like we are not the victims, we are the criminals.
In response, a West Midlands police spokesperson told GB News, our officers have been investigating reports of harassment against a family in Birmingham for some time now. A detailed investigation was carried out, which included speaking to the victims and the young people responsible for the offences at length. The parents of the young people were supportive of police action, and we are satisfied that a community resolution was the correct step to take given the young age of the people involved and their history of non-offending. When taking the decision to move ahead with an out-of-court disposal such as this, we took into account the feelings and wishes of the victims, but overly criminalising these people would not be proportionate in this case. For now, the family has no choice but to hope such a resolution works and the youths stay away. For them, feeling safe in this city again will not be easy. Jack Carson, GB News.
Well, that's an excellent story, and I'm afraid it's deeply disturbing that the police do not think that's a hate crime. Kafir is racist abuse.
So just to be clear, so they were, we presume, Muslim boys attacking the Hindu family.
Seems so.
And calling, because that was given away in the name kafir, in the word kafir. What do you make of that, Emma? It's terrible, isn't it?
Well, as Andrew says, if that's not a hate crime, then, you know, the term is absolutely meaningless. And again, living in fear, you would be. When you see that footage of people running up to the doorbell, kicking in the door, or kicking at the door, and this really family have been there for 8 years. It's not as though they've, I don't know, I mean, there's no excuse for that, but they haven't just arrived, they live there, this is their community, and they have a young child as well.
Yeah, how terrible, how terrifying for the child and mum.
How terrifying for the child, and
would you want the child to go out?
No.
Yeah, you'd be then worrying about letting your child go to school, to walk to school.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, Matthew, because in a situation like that, to some degree, I'm with the police, that you don't want to overly criminalise teenagers who do something stupid, kicking a door. You don't want them to...
And they're only likely to be, you know, they're not going to be sent to jail for it, you know, because they're their age.
But maybe there should be something. It feels like there's so much wayward youth now. There needs to be a middle ground.
The hate crime element must be particularly upsetting for them, because there was clearly, as we heard, I mean, what a great report from Jack, and his award-winning Jack.
Award-winning Jack. They should make them do some form of community service. That's what they do in the community.
Hate crime, that's
yes, they do. Because others, they feel they've got away with it,
yes,
Matthew, and they might do it again.
Yeah, no, I mean, so let's hope that the community resolution actually involves them confronting what they were doing and understanding what they were doing. Because what we can't see is the sort of ghettoisation where one community live in one area, another community live in another area. We've seen very disturbing over the last 6 months in Leicester, which has a sort of, it's about a third Muslim, about a third Hindu and a third white. We've seen sort of intercommunal violence around a lot of Indian politics a lot of the time between the Hindu and the Muslim communities. Let's not hope that's spreading. We don't want kids starting to sort of take that and use it to kind of divide our community, so it's very worrying.
But I also wonder if it had been white kids abusing that family, would the police response have been different? Do we go back to what the Home Secretary said about two-tier policing? I'm not saying that would happen, but it's a question. You would have to ask that question. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And there mustn't seem to be two-tier policing in any way. If there's any racial element, doesn't matter what, you know, from what race it springs from, it must be treated exactly the same. So let's hope that this community resolution is firm.
Which brings us on to our second story, actually, Emma, and this is about rising immigration fueling the far right. Who's been saying this?
So this is the Home Office Minister, Laura Farris, who's been saying that hundreds of thousands of migrants arriving in this country are going to be, possibly going to be, the big electoral issue, and that it does risk fueling the far right and increasing that anger. And I think she's absolutely. I think she has a, you know, quite a perceptive point.
I think it's already an electoral issue.
It's this is going to be, probably along with the economy, it is going to be the electoral issue. And the problem is when you keep, you know, denigrating people as xenophobic or, you know, foreigner-hating or racist, people are feeling the reality on the ground is that people are feeling the pressure all around us because of a lack of planning, because of a lack of any kind of strategy from the government. People are feeling the pressure on schools, on housing specifically, on hospitals, on our health services, and they are concerned about it. And that does not make you
far right
or far right
Emma,
or racist.
I think some people are now feeling they don't feel this is their home. They feel they can feel alien. And then I read with incredulity your lot, Matthew, say they're going to cut immigration to 200,000. How are they going to do that?
Well, I suspect it wasn't just...
Matthew, was it a typo?
200,000?
No, it was a typo, but I think it wasn't just you who read it with incredulity. I think it was the Labour leadership that read it with incredulity.
Because this was an interview at the weekend.
Darren Jones, who's the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
He's never off the telly.
He's never off the telly now because the leadership, Keir Starmer, the leadership regard him as an absolute rising star. He's an MP from Bristol, and he's sort of meant to be the next big thing. Well, he went on telly yesterday on the BBC and gave this slightly car-crashy interview where he ended up, I think, committing not entirely without having had it signed off by anybody, that Labour would bring immigration down to a couple of 100,000, which is only doable by doing things that Labour won't do, which is things like getting rid of foreign students, clamping down on foreign students and their dependents. So I think the biggest problem with this in terms of fueling the far right is when you give promises that you don't meet. I think if you explain, people at least think you're being honest with them. But we've got Cameron back in the cabinet who said it was going to be down to tens of thousands.
He did.
But isn't it...
And that just fuels cynicism.
Yeah, it does.
But this is something about language. We need a word, we need some sort of terminology whereby it is OK to say that you would like to have fewer people... See, I'm struggling to find the words even now. You would like lower net migration, not because you don't like people from the country, but because you are worried about the fact that the roads are packed.
That's right.
You can't
totally.
people...
Because we haven't got the infrastructure.
Absolutely. But it shouldn't be a left-right issue.
We do need some...
It isn't a left-right issue.
We do need some people coming in from abroad, because we have to be really careful about that. We do need people coming in from abroad because we have falling birth rates. We do need people working in our health services, in the care sector. Do you know why? Because we don't pay those sectors properly, because young people in this country, born in this country, don't want to do those jobs because they're paid barely minimum wage. Yeah. But if we have that system, fine. Yeah. To have nearly, 700, 800,000...
But that's why the left have got to own their position on this.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Because Keir didn't mention the immigration word. We had two I words...
Because he's scared to.
Because he's scared. I'm the only person who ever talks... Labour's actually got a plan on the small boats. We won't bore you with what it is, but I'm the only person who ever talks about it. Yvette Cooper doesn't talk about it. She's Shadow Home Secretary, because she's worried about upsetting sort of liberal and left opinion, whereas you've got to own it. And in Denmark, the Danish Labour Party came back to power because they owned the immigration issue, which had cost them a previous election. They sent every single house in Denmark their plan to stop migration, and they've done it. And they've got a lot of flack from people to the left.
I don't want to press you on your knowledge of Danish, Matthew, but do you have any idea what you'd use to describe a person who wants lower immigration, tighter borders, but isn't
yeah, I don't know what language you'd use, but what they did in Denmark is they just said that they would be very firm on numbers, that they were very firm on asylum seekers. They have a bit of a sort of effective turnaround policy. So they've, they're not, even though they're in the EU, they're not worried about the European Court. What's hilarious is I used to do conferences with the Danes and the Swedes, and of course you got the bridge where the old detective series was held between the two, and that's become a big point of contact. And the Swedes wouldn't talk to the Danes because they think they're too right wing because they've clamped down. This is within the two Labour parties, because they've clamped down on immigration.
And it was almost as in parenthesis, you said, and they don't care about the European Court.
Yeah, they do. They absolutely.
Well, can we do that, please? Yeah. We've left the European Union. Why bother with the European Court?
So I can tell you the Danish Labour Party is substantially to what you might say the right, but I would just say firmer, takes a tougher stance on immigration than this government, for example. So it shouldn't be a left-right issue. And in terms of the British Labour Party, they need to get off their back foot on it.
Right.
There's no such thing as left versus right anymore, is there?
No, and the more you push it underground, the more people, just like with Brexit, the more you say you're a xenophobe, you're a racist. People are still worried about this, but they can't talk about it. They can't openly say this is an issue we need to discuss.
And if they feel their politicians aren't talking about it, they will go to the right.
Well, that's your homework for next time, Matthew Lars. I want you to work out what language they used in Denmark.
I will. I'll bring the plan.
That brought people together rather than divided them. That brought people together on that issue. Yeah. Right. Liz Truss has said the world will be safer without Joe Biden in the White House. She's right, isn't she, Emma?
Good for Liz, and I never thought I'd say good for Liz, but we're speaking in the context of she was talking about the threat from China, Russia and Iran. We are speaking in the context of the Hamas atrocities on Israel, and Liz Truss is speaking out and saying, look, this is an issue. Rishi Sunak has not been very vocal on China, Russia and Iran. We have a foreign secretary who has a complicated relationship with China, one might say.
Yes, he does.
And I think Liz Truss is actually making a very, whether you agree with her or not, whether it's right for her to land in Washington, D.C.
It's an interesting time to do it, because she is literally arriving in Washington today.
D.C. and attacking this enfeebled Joe Biden.
81, Sleepy Joe.
Sleepy Joe, there we go, that's nice.
But do you see the world being a safer place with President Biden in the White House?
Do I see it being safer with Trump?
Trump, I mean. Trump,
oh, actually, yes, safer, yes.
Do you?
Well, because
it was. I feel the exact opposite on this one.
It was. Yeah. And at least you have someone who is in control.
Look, what really worries me is that if the Republicans get back into power, if Trump gets back into power, that the money will be cut off for Ukraine. We're all concentrating on the Middle East at the moment, but there's been a lot of rumblings in Washington amongst the Republicans, and indeed Trump has said that he'll just sort of wave a magic wand and sort it. But we need to keep the supply of money and equipment going to Ukraine, and that, in my view, is endangered by Trump.
Are you confident that every single penny of that money is being spent correctly to defend the people of Ukraine?
No, I'm sure it isn't, but I think, despite whatever's been creamed off, we have to do it because we can't give in to Putin, and we can't let this distraction. We saw yesterday Hamas thanking Putin. We can't let that kind of axis of evil, to use that phrase from a few years ago, carry on.
But the fact is, Biden, let's be honest, he's on the estate, he's on the road to being, can I use the expression gaga? I mean, cognitive issues.
Look, it's very upsetting for, it's very upsetting, isn't it?
I mean, there are cognitive issues. I mean, he gets confused, isn't it, where he is.
The best thing for him would be to go with dignity. The problem is, of course, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, is not popular, looks out of her depth. I was being slightly more polite, but yes, you may argue that. And therefore, who could step in as the unity figure? Is there sort of...
Hillary Clinton?
Or Michelle Obama?
Are you a fan of Robert Kennedy? So Robert Kennedy obviously was a Democrat. He's had to stand as a Republican because the things that he was saying were deemed too controversial by the Democratic Party, and he's doing surprisingly well in the polls.
Yes, no, I would put my vote behind him.
But he's going to be an independent, isn't he? They never win.
He is an independent.
They never win.
But he's very clever because he does, Matthew, manage to reach both sides of this political...
Yeah, I think both sides are worried about him taking votes off him, because traditionally you've had Greens stood in the famous election with the hanging chads with the Bush
and then Ross Perot, remember Ross Perot?
But the Green, arguably, who got 2 or 3%, arguably cost Al Gore against George Bush when it came down to the wire.
That's right.
Third party candidates can actually...
Why do they have so many interesting candidates and we have basically zero? I mean, we're
just saying that Keir Starmer is absolutely fascinating. Setting the world alight.
One thing you would not say about Keir Starmer is fascinating.
Yes. Has he ever told you a joke that's made you laugh?
I'm not sure I've ever had a joke. The only Labour leader who can tell good jokes is ex-Labour leader Neil Kinnock.
What did you make of his choice of music? Tell him about Keir Starmer.
He goes on Classic FM and he's asked if you could pick a piece of music which would best sum up your view of the Labour Party. Oh, to flipping joy, the national anthem of the European Union.
I can tell you, I've got scars on my back from the Classic FM interview, because Ed had to go and do it, because the person who chairs the company that owns Classic FM is a Labour peer.
I know he is.
Absolutely. And we were forced to go and do it, and Ed doesn't like classical music, and we literally, I've never seen him so nervous, because he can't play Aha on Classic FM because he's chosen music.
So script him, tell him what to say.
Oh, no, we did. I mean, we had a lot of rehearsals for that one. But we've worked out the Grimsby Town cap.
Yeah.
Which is, so I bet you that he got that on a trip to Grimsby on a, all politicians go and do these photo ops. He'll have got that in Grimsby.
It's a beanie.
Yes.
And it's a bobble hat.
It's a bobble hat. Right. It's not a beret.
Right.
It got him off the hook
Matthew
talking
and Emma,
about
thank you so
Ode
much.
to Joy.
That is it from Britain's Newsroom this morning. Up next, Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily. See you tomorrow.
See you then.
Thank you. Coming up on the show, Rishi Sunak let something slip a little bit earlier, didn't he, Tom?
He did. Speaking around an hour ago, Rishi Sunak started talking about migration, how important it is for people to come to the country, and particularly one visa liberalisation that happened under Boris Johnson. Could that be part to blame for the high migration we've been seeing? We'll dive into that.
Yes, we will indeed. And we'll also be looking at what Sadiq Khan had to say at the COVID inquiry. What's he moaning about this time?
He's moaning about not being invited to perhaps the most useless meetings on the planet. We'll be telling you why he's put his foot in it once we get to the show. Do not go anywhere. There's so much to cover on Good Afternoon Britain.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. It's going to be a cold week this week. Today, skies getting a little brighter in the west, but staying fairly dull and damp across the east, close to this area of